All right, welcome back, everyone. We're jumping back into modern Indian history,
Okay.
picking up where we left off in part 1
Right.
of our UPSC GS1 deep dive.
Yeah.
And anyone fascinated by this era,
Sure.
especially students out there, is welcome to join us.
Absolutely.
Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and like.
Yes, please.
Okay, now imagine you're in 1937 India. The Government of India Act of 1935 has just, reshaped the political landscape,
Big changes.
giving Congress ministries control
Yeah.
in several provinces.
Yeah.
Mahatma Gandhi saw this
Yes.
as the perfect moment for a change in education.
I see.
Enter the Wardha scheme of education.
The Wardha scheme. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Wardha scheme was a bold vision.
Yeah.
It aimed to create an education system that wouldn't just teach, but empower individuals,
Right.
uplift communities, and contribute to India's self-reliance.
Like a blueprint for independent India.
Yeah, exactly.
So not just reading, writing, arithmetic, but building a nation.
Precisely.
One thing that struck me was this idea of education
Okay.
being self-supporting through
Yes.
productive trade
Right. Productive trade.
alongside academic learning.
Yeah. What was Gandhi's thinking there?
That sounds revolutionary for its time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What was Gandhi's thinking?
Gandhi was very pragmatic.
Okay.
He knew that waiting for funding to improve education
Yeah.
would take too long.
Right.
So his solution was to make education self-sufficient.
I see.
And by productive trade, he meant
Yeah.
integrating practical skills, vocational training
Oh, okay.
directly into the curriculum.
Interesting.
So imagine students learning carpentry, weaving, agriculture,
Right.
not just in theory, but by actually
Okay.
creating products they could sell.
Wow.
Learning by doing with a tangible outcome.
So picture a classroom with looms and pottery wheels.
Yeah.
Even a small forge.
That's the idea.
It challenges the traditional image of a school, doesn't it?
It does.
So how did they balance academics with all this hands-on work?
Well, that was one of the key features.
Okay.
And also one of the criticisms of the scheme.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some felt that it leaned too heavily on craft work,
I see.
overshadowing academic learning.
Interesting.
You know, like, are we turning schools into mini factories?
Right.
But for its supporters, this was about more than just skills. It was about building character,
Right.
self-reliance,
Yeah.
a sense of ownership. And remember, this was a time when India was striving for independence.
Of course, yeah.
Gandhi envisioned an education system that would not just produce literate citizens,
Right.
but skilled, self-sufficient individuals ready to contribute to a new India.
So it was preparing students to be active participants
Exactly.
in building the nation,
Yeah.
not just passive recipients of knowledge.
That's it.
That's a powerful idea.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more
Sure.
about some of the other key features of the scheme that might stand out to someone studying for the UPSC?
So another major focus was
Okay.
the child-centric approach.
The child-centric approach.
This wasn't about rote learning and memorization.
Right, yeah.
It was about nurturing each child's development,
Yeah.
physical, intellectual, emotional, and even spiritual.
Wow.
Imagine a classroom where individual needs and talents
Right.
are recognized and fostered.
Okay.
A far cry from the rigid systems of the time.
Interesting.
And then, of course, there was the emphasis
Yeah.
on using the mother tongue as the medium of instruction.
Using the mother tongue.
Okay. Gandhi believed that learning in one's native language
Yeah.
would make education more accessible and meaningful.
So many of these ideas seem commonplace today,
I know, right?
but they were considered radical back then.
Absolutely.
It's like the Wardha scheme was laying the groundwork for a completely new way
Yes.
of thinking about education.
Exactly.
And it went beyond individual learning.
It did.
The scheme emphasized community participation,
Yes.
with schools managed and supported
Right.
by local communities.
Exactly. This ensured that education wasn't imposed from above,
I see.
but was tailored to
Yeah.
local needs and aspirations.
That makes sense.
And of course, intertwined with all of this was a strong focus
Yeah.
on character building,
Oh.
instilling moral and ethical values alongside academic knowledge.
Right.
Gandhi saw education as a means
Mm-hmm.
to create responsible citizens grounded in truth,
Okay.
nonviolence, and compassion.
Those are values deeply embedded in his own philosophy.
Absolutely.
It's like this scheme wasn't just about imparting knowledge.
Right.
It was about shaping.
Yes.
a whole new generation of Indians,
Precise.
equipped not only with skills, but also with a strong moral compass,
That's it.
ready to take on the challenges of building a new nation. But with such an ambitious vision,
Yeah.
were there any drawbacks or challenges that the scheme faced?
Of course, no plan is perfect.
Especially one as ambitious as the Wardha scheme.
Okay.
Critics argued that combining work and study
Yeah.
might be overwhelming for young children,
I see.
potentially impacting their overall well-being.
Okay.
And then there was the issue of finding qualified teachers
Right.
who could effectively implement this unique blend
Yeah.
of academics and vocational training. Not an easy task.
Right.
Not an easy task at all.
Yeah.
It's interesting because even though the Wardha scheme wasn't fully implemented,
Right.
it sparked debates
Yeah.
that are still relevant today.
Mm.
Think about the concerns back then.
Okay.
Some saw this focus on productive trade
Yeah.
as turning schools into mini factories.
Mini factories. Wow.
It raised questions about
Mhm.
whether craft work might overshadow academic learning
Right.
and whether it was appropriate for young children.
Right.
These are questions we're still grappling with.
Yeah, it's like we're looking at a historical mirror.
The Wardha scheme, with all its ambition and challenges,
Yeah.
forces us to ask,
It does.
what should a balance be
Right.
between practical skills and traditional academics?
Mm-hmm.
How do we prepare students for the real world
Yes.
without compromising their well-being?
That's the question.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is.
And that's why studying something like the Wardha scheme is so valuable,
Right.
especially for our UPSC aspirants.
Absolutely.
It gives you that historical perspective,
Mhm.
helps you see how these debates have evolved
Yeah.
and how they continue to shape education policy in India.
Exactly.
It's like having a behind-the-scenes look
Yes,
at the evolution of educational thought.
it is.
But beyond those debates, were there any lasting impacts?
Yes, definitely.
Did any of his ideas actually stick around?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You can see echoes of the Wardha scheme
Hmm.
in modern education,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't implemented exactly as Gandhi envisioned it,
Right.
for example. Remember the emphasis on community participation?
Yeah, I do.
Well, that idea is alive and well today
Really?
in things like parent-teacher associations,
Oh, okay.
local school boards, even the involvement of businesses in supporting schools.
So that idea of bringing education closer to the community,
Exactly.
making it responsive to local needs,
Yes,
that's something that resonated,
it did.
even beyond the Wardha scheme itself.
Absolutely.
It's like a seed that was planted and
Mhm.
continues to grow
And grow.
in different forms.
Precisely.
And then there's the focus on the mother tongue.
Yes,
The Wardha scheme championed
it did.
the idea of using the native language
Right.
as the medium of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while English remains important,
Of course.
especially for higher education,
Yeah,
there's a growing recognition
there is.
of the benefits of early learning
Right.
in
Yeah.
one's mother tongue.
Absolutely.
We see this in multilingual education programs
Yes.
and the emphasis on preserving linguistic diversity. That's right.
It's almost like the Wardha scheme was ahead of its time
It was.
in recognizing the importance of language and culture in education.
It was a very insightful approach.
And for our listeners who are students,
Yeah.
imagine how much easier it would be
It'd be so much easier.
to grasp complex subjects
Absolutely.
if they were taught in a language you are already comfortable with.
It makes a huge difference.
It does.
And it's a testament to the insightful thinking
Right.
behind the Wardha scheme.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just about changing what was taught,
Right.
but also how it was taught,
I see.
making education more accessible
Yeah.
and relevant
Right.
to the Indian context.
Now, one aspect of the scheme that I find particularly intriguing
Okay.
is the idea of integrating productive trade
Right.
into the curriculum.
Yeah,
It was such a bold idea,
it was.
and some might say a controversial idea.
Definitely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
I mean, it's definitely a complex issue. While the intention was to empower
Right.
individuals and communities through skills development,
Yeah.
the idea of combining work and study
Right.
for young children
Yes.
raised concerns about potential exploitation
Right.
and whether it could hinder academic progress.
That's a valid point.
It makes you wonder how we ensure that practical skills training
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come at the expense
Right.
of a child's well-being
Yeah.
and their right to a well-rounded education.
Absolutely.
It's a dilemma
It is.
that societies around the world are
Yes.
still grappling with.
Absolutely. And the Wardha scheme despite its challenges, forces us to confront these difficult questions head on.
It does.
It compels us to think critically about the purpose of education, the balance between practical skills and academic knowledge, and the ethical considerations involved in integrating work and study, especially for young learners. And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC, understanding these nuances of the Wardha scheme is crucial.
It is.
It's not just about memorizing facts, but about being able to analyze different perspectives, weigh the pros and cons, and form your own informed opinions.
That's crucial.
It's about developing that critical thinking that's so essential for success in the exam.
Precisely.
And beyond the exam.
Yes.
These are issues that have real-world implications.
They do.
As future policymakers, administrators, or even just informed citizens.
Absolutely.
Understanding the history of educational debates and their relevance to contemporary challenges is invaluable.
It is.
So let's dig a little deeper into how some of the principles of the Wardha scheme were being reflected in modern education. You mentioned earlier that the idea of learning by doing has found new life.
It has.
Can you give us some specific examples? Sure.
How that's happening?
Well, think about the rise of experiential learning in education. We're seeing more emphasis on project-based learning, internships, and hands-on activities.
I see.
These approaches, while different from the craft-based productive trade of the Wardha scheme, share that same core principle.
Interesting.
Engaging students actively in the learning process, allowing them to apply knowledge in practical settings and develop skills through experience.
It's like taking the essence of the Wardha scheme.
It is.
That idea of learning by doing.
Yes.
And adapting it to a 21st century context.
Exactly.
So instead of weaving baskets or making pottery, students might be designing websites, building robots, or creating business plans.
That's the idea.
It's still about learning through experience.
Exactly.
Just with different tools and applications.
Precisely.
That's a really important point. It is.
The Wardha scheme wasn't meant to be a static blueprint. But rather a source of inspiration.
Yes.
A catalyst for new ideas and approaches.
Absolutely.
Education.
It's about recognizing the enduring value of those principles and finding creative ways to implement them in a way that's relevant to today's world and the needs of our students.
That's a really good point.
It is.
The Wardha scheme wasn't meant to be a static blueprint. But rather a source of inspiration.
Yes.
A catalyst for new ideas and approaches to education.
And I think one of the most important lessons we can take from it is the need for flexibility and ongoing evaluation. The scheme faced challenges during its implementation. And it's unlikely that any educational reform will ever be perfect from the outset. We need to be willing to adapt, learn from our mistakes, and constantly strive for improvement.
It's like embarking on a journey.
It is.
Not just reaching a destination.
Exactly.
And as we continue exploring the legacy of the Wardha scheme, I'm curious to hear more about how its principles, particularly those related to character building and moral education, are finding a place in modern education.
That's a great point.
While the specific methods might differ, the idea that education should nurture not just the mind, but also the heart and soul.
Absolutely.
That it should cultivate ethical citizens. Is gaining increasing recognition today.
It is.
It makes you wonder. What would a modern-day Wardha scheme look like?
That's a fascinating question.
How could we take those principles of self-reliance, community involvement, and holistic development and translate them into an education system that meets the needs of today's world?
That's a fascinating question.
It is.
And one that deserves careful consideration.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, it's an invitation to think critically, to engage with these ideas, and to imagine how we can shape the future of education. In a way that honors the spirit of the Wardha scheme while addressing the unique challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. You know, it's remarkable how relevant the Wardha scheme still is.
It really is. Considering it was formulated decades ago, it's a testament to those powerful ideas, especially when they're rooted in human needs.
Exactly. And, you know, for our listeners, prepping for the UPSC GS1 history exam.
Right.
Analyzing these historical connections and how they relate to what's happening today.
Yeah.
That's really crucial for success.
It's like having a key. You know,
it is.
That unlocks a deeper understanding.
Right.
Of the present.
Exactly. And when we apply this key to the Wardha scheme, we see its legacy goes way beyond just its time.
So give us some concrete examples. How are those principles reflected in what we see today?
Okay, well, one striking example is the growing emphasis on holistic education.
Okay, yeah.
That was central to the Wardha scheme, and today there's this recognition that education should nurture more than just intellectual ability.
Right. Their physical, emotional, and social development, too.
Exactly. So we're moving away from that narrow view of education as just knowledge.
Right. It's about being well-rounded.
Right. And this shift aligns perfectly with the Wardha scheme's vision.
To develop those well-rounded individuals who can really contribute.
Yes, exactly. It's not just about acing exams.
Right. It's about being compassionate.
Yeah.
Responsible.
And equipped for life's complexities.
Which brings us to another fascinating aspect.
Oh, you mean the emphasis on character building?
Yes. Moral education.
Right. Gandhi's influence is so clear there. He really believed education had to go beyond just academics.
To instill a strong moral compass.
Absolutely. And while the methods might be different today, the principle's still relevant.
Yeah, there's a growing awareness of the need to cultivate ethical decision-making and empathy.
It's like we're rediscovering those timeless values.
Especially in a world that can feel so focused on individual achievement.
That's a great point. The Wardha scheme, it reminds us that education should serve a higher purpose.
Right. Something beyond just personal gain.
Yes, something that betters society. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
Given the challenges the Wardha scheme faced, what lessons can we draw from it to guide us moving forward?
That's a good question.
One crucial lesson is context. You know, the Wardha scheme was visionary, but it was also grounded in its time.
Right. We can't just copy and paste solutions from the past.
Exactly. We have to adapt, draw inspiration from what stood the test of time, while also looking at the challenges of right now.
So it's more about continuous improvement.
Yes, guided by a clear vision and a willingness to learn. And as we navigate this ever-evolving world of education, the Wardha scheme is a great reminder that pursuing meaningful reform requires more than just ideas. It takes an understanding of history, ethical principles, and being open to change.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, and for our listeners prepping for the UPSC, I think they've gained a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and like our show for more of these journeys. Until next time, keep those minds curious.
Absolutely. There's always more to discover. Thanks for joining us.